Hello and welcome to Twisted Britain, a podcast on true crime in Britain with a sprinkling of the weird and macabre. And your hosts are me, Bob Dale.
And me, Ali Downey.
Good evening, Ali Danny. How are you?
I am fabulous. Life in Bournemouth is great. It is sunny.
Nice. Oh yeah, we were talking about this yesterday when I phoned you. It's nice up here, but probably nicer where you are.
That's gorgeous down here.
So we are remote recording again. But for this evening, you have a tale of horror, tale of crime, tale of what?
A tale of murder.
Nice one. It's very good.
It's good.
It's probably the most Scottish thing that's ever been said in Bournemouth as well.
It is. There's been a murder in Burger King.
I like it a lot. I've not had a Burger King in ages, man.
You're not missing out.
No, I don't think so. Anyway, what is your tale of murder?
Well, this week, I'd like to talk about a very sad crime, actually, from the early 19th century that troubles me for a number of reasons, which will become apparent as we go through the details of this case. The tragic tale begins in the small English village of Strewd.
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 Where-
Very Scottish-sounding English town.
I was going to say almost Scandinavian sounding, to be honest.
Strewd.
Yeah, maybe a strudel.
Yeah, it's in the county of Kent, quite near Rochester.
So it's not too far from you then.
No, it's actually not too far from me. No, it's right on the banks of the River Medway.
Have you done enough Scottish stuff now that you're just working your way north from the south coast? Is that what's happening now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you just cover Britain by working your way north.
Yeah, I'm going from the south up the country.
I'll defeat you at the wall, Alistair.
Which one, the Antonine or the Hadrian?
I mean, maybe my garden wall, to be honest.
Nice.
I'm not putting a limit on how far you make it.
I've made it to your garden wall before.
Indeed, and you will do again. But Strewd, tell me of Strewd.
Yeah, Strewd. Here, Robert Taylor lived with his wife and his 13-year-old son, Richard, and daughter in a small cottage. Now, the 1800s, as we know, were times of huge change up and down the country as the Industrial Revolution changed manufacturing and production methods, creating new and fresh opportunities in the big cities like London and Manchester. But it was also a time of increasing poverty as cities failed to meet the needs of the huge influx of people looking for work.
I was going to say,
and if anything,
the poverty comes from the influx of people, doesn't it? Like, it wasn't that they're moving into poor areas; they were just creating poor areas almost.
Yeah, the cities couldn't keep up with the influx of people. The services just weren't meant and designed to deal with that number of people. And if anything, it was worse in the small rural villages like Strewd, as new farming techniques made unskilled farm workers less and less necessary and put more and more labourers out of work. And the problems were compounded in rural areas as well due to limited access to education and healthcare facilities.
It's almost the same story as you're getting now. Like, when they're building huge amounts of new builds on the edges of towns, the first outcry is there enough schools? Is there enough hospitals?
Yes. Sarah has just told me that it's pronounced Strewd, not Strewd.
Ah, well.
Strewd.
Nice.
Sarah, you need to come in and tell us on mic.
Tell us on mic.
Strewd.
Strewd. We'll take that.
Strewd.
You don't need to roll any R's.
I have to roll my R's.
Do you need to roll the R's?
It's
Strewd.
great to have Sarah here.
I mean, she's automatically made the AI generated clip for this episode.
I think that's right anyway.
I believe it.
Strewd.
I believe everything you say right now.
Don't think we dark at me, Annie.
Yes, it is.
She's
She's not happy with me right now because my dog peed on her wedding shoes. So Beck and I are both in the doghouse.
Quite literally.
Quite literally. Now, as I said, at the same time, a series of enclosure acts meant that a lot of the land, which previously had been held in common by the people, now belonged to wealthy landowners. and it was no longer able to be used by the common people for grazing or for growing their own food. And this meant that families who previously could have provided for themselves with a fair level of self-sufficiency were now having to earn more money just to eat. By the 1830s, life in rural English villages was often a struggle for survival, as people lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions and found it harder and harder just to feed themselves, let alone their children.
And this is due to the influx of people in the area, basically causing more demand on the land and stuff.
Yeah, more demand on the land, new farming techniques coming in, making farm labourers less necessary and putting more and more people out of work in the rural areas.
Automation changing the landscape, quite literally.
Exactly. Many families now found themselves living below what we'd call the breadline and unable to sustain themselves without assistance from the government in the form of what was known as outdoor relief or the parish allowance, which was spoken of before.
I've had an outdoor relief before.
You have, and almost got arrested for it.
It's a terrible sentence, sorry.
Now, the parish allowance was a form of financial assistance offered by the local parishes to those in danger of destitution or to the elderly or the disabled. It was intended to help keep poor people fed, keep their heads above water, so to speak, and prevent them from having to be sent to workhouses.
Yeah, which you don't want to go to. Notoriously horrible places to be.
They are. Yeah, they were hideous places to go.
Do you remember the Annie McLeod
Anyway, back to
experience?
this. Oh my god, yes. New Lanark.
I think we've probably talked about this in the podcast before, but it's like one of my like stuck in memories from primary school, man, was the going to New Lanark and that Annie McLeod like workforce roller coaster almost that you go on.
It was amazing. With the hologram.
Yeah, and that's like the best part of 30 years ago, man. They were not good holograms, but in my mind, they were like the holodeck from Star Trek.
Yeah, I remember it being amazing, but I bet it wasn't.
No, let's go again another time.
Yeah, we should.
I'd be up for that, definitely, man.
I bet we could record from New Lanark.
Oh yeah, I mean, they've got a huge amount of outdoor areas. With the new kit, we should be able to just record wherever we want now.
There you go. On location recording at New Lanark.
Let's do it. I'm keen.
Anyway, back to our tale. On Friday the 4th of March, in the year 1831, Robert Taylor, who was a tallow chandler by trade, which is essentially a candle maker, sent his son Richard on the 9-mile walk to Aylesford to collect the family's weekly parish allowance, which was about 9 shillings.
That's a long-ass walk for 9 shillings.
It is. This was a task and a journey that 13-year-old Richard had made many, many times before, and the young boy was very familiar with the route. It wasn't unusual for children in their early teens at this time to already be holding down a job, so sending Richard on this errand would have been absolutely normal for a father around this time. Richard's younger sister frequently accompanied him on the journey as well, but on the day in question, she'd stayed home to help Robert with his work. Richard was described...
What age is Richard at this point?
13.
13. I was trying to relate that, but like I can't imagine sending Isaac to the shop around the corner, but I know he's only 7. But like maybe at 13. Yeah, okay. Maybe even still now. Did you have a key to your house after school at 13?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I did as well. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
But I don't think Mum would have sent me 9 miles to collect, like, the family allowance.
She might have sent you 9 miles just to go away.
She would have sent me 9 miles to go away, actually. 13-year-old Richard was described as being of above-average intelligence for a boy of his age, and he was very polite and well-spoken for a child brought up in a rural village. Collecting the family's parish allowance was a job that, as I said, Richard Taylor had done many times before. And his father, Robert, had instructed the boy many times on the importance of the task and on the importance of safeguarding the money discreetly on his return journey. As a consequence, Richard had
Was he quite well educated then? Not well educated, but like I'm picturing rural life, this kind of time period that he dropped out of school like 3 or 4 years ago, but he was all right.
He was far better educated than most other rural kids, and far better spoken.
Good manners go a long way, Alistair. I'm a happy man with that.
They do. It's true. Now, as a consequence of his father's warnings, Richard had a well-established routine for concealing the money, which he adhered to diligently, and he was acutely aware of how much this admittedly small sum of money meant to his impoverished family. Before leaving, on the morning of the 4th of March, Richard asked his father if he could borrow a small knife, as he wanted to carve himself a bow and arrow on his return journey from Aylford. A reasonable request for a boy raised in a rural community? Richard simply wanted to turn the weekly errand into a bit of fun for himself.
That's a sick idea, man. Like, yeah, crack on, make a bow and arrow.
Carve a bow and arrow. So his father, Robert, agreed, and he gave his son a small wood-carving knife before he went on his way. Richard left that morning at around 9 a.m, wearing a blue jacket, brown trousers over stockings, and black shoes. He also had a southwester hat on his head and a striped handkerchief around his neck.
So he looked pretty sick.
Robert saw his son off. Yeah, he looked good. Well turned out for a rural kid as well.
I was just thinking, like,
Robert saw his son.
it was not
Go.
abnormal. I mean, in the UK now, it's abnormal for a child of that age to have a wood carving knife, but like, not even just modern society.
No, it's illegal.
Yes, there is that. But like, when we were on holiday in Holland, there was a German family camping on the pitch next to us, and their wee boy, who must have been like 13, had a knife that he cut about with, not as a weapon, just as a tool.
Absolute. 30 years ago in this country, I mean, I was in the Scouts and we had wood carving knives and pen knives.
Not now.
Not now, no. Anyway, on the morning in question, Robert saw his son off in the morning as usual and then began his day's work. The walk to Aylesford was mostly along well-kept roads, and the round trip normally took young Richard about 6 hours, with him returning around 3 in the afternoon. However, on that fateful 4th of March, 3 p.m. came and went, and Richard still hadn't come back. Robert Taylor waited all afternoon and evening, with his sense of unease growing greater and greater as more and more time passed. Richard was a very dependable and well-behaved boy, not easily led astray or tending to tardiness. By the next morning, when Richard still hadn't returned, Robert's unease had grown into a stomach-clenching worry that something terrible had happened to his son. So he made the 9-mile trip into Aylesford himself to try and work out where Richard might be. Following his son's assumed route, Robert first went to the address of the parish's relieving officer, Mr. Cupworth. Here he learned that Richard had arrived on time as usual and in fine spirits. The boy had received the 9 shillings parish allowance and then left on his way back home just after midday. Richard had hidden the money, as he always did, in a drawstring pouch, which he then concealed in the palm of a pair of mittens, which he always took with him.
I can't imagine the burnt-in guilt that this man is feeling, because he's the one that sent the boy out and the boy's not come back. Now, we don't, at this point, know, I'm presuming it's not pretty, but we don't know what's happened to him. You've not told us yet. However, that feeling of like, I don't know how to describe it, that level of guilt of going, oh, fuck, I've sent him out and something's happened. He must have been like in bits, man.
Yeah. 10 out of 10 panic, 10 out of 10 guilt, 10 out of 10 worry.
Absolutely, yeah.
Robert retraced his son's route back to their home in Strewd, but still saw no sign of Richard. By this time, news of the boy's disappearance had spread through the small community, and during the rest of the day of the 5th of March, and from sun-up until sunset the next day, concerned villagers assisted in a search of the road and of the woods surrounding Strewd, trying to find the missing Richard Taylor. Despite the effort put into the search, Richard seemed to have vanished into thin air. which is an odd phrase.
Yeah.
It's always thin air.
But
It's never fat air or chubby air or thick air.
you all right?
Yeah. I think about these things.
I know you
I
do.
do.
I know you do. How many?
And being a naturally inquisitive soul, I felt the need to actually look into this. And like so many phrases in our English language, it comes from the great bard himself, William Shakespeare.
Or was he the first one to have used it?
He was. In 1604, the play Othello gave us the line, "Go, vanish into air, away." And then in 1610, in The Tempest, Prospero tells the audience, "These actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air." And that's the first use of the term.
I like it.
It's a pointless fact for everyone.
No, I very much enjoy it. Thank you very much for that. How many people are out looking at this point? Have we got a rough idea?
There was about 300 people staying in Strewd, and about half of them helped with the search.
Oh, so it's like all men to the pumps.
Yeah, it really was. So anyway, getting back to our tale. Mr. Cupworth, the parish relieving officer, wasn't the last person to see Richard alive on the 4th of March. A witness named Mr. Lewington had seen Richard in the morning around 10 a.m. when he'd walked part of the way into Aylesford with him, and then again in the afternoon when he saw Richard leaving the town in the company of 2 local boys, John Bird Bell and his younger brother James. Mr. Lewington was a sailor aboard the ship HMS Warrior, which was anchored not far away, and he also helped with the search for Richard on the 5th of March.
So they've got some reasonable sightings.
Yeah, there were a few sightings. Another witness who had seen Richard with these 2 boys that afternoon was Mrs. Jones, who lived in a cottage not far from Benham Common, on the outskirts of Aylesford. John and James Bird were asked on the 5th of March if they knew where Richard was, but they replied that they had only walked with him as far as a turnip field just outside of town, and then left him to make the journey home himself. Richard's apparent disappearance was the talk of the surrounding towns like Rochester and Aylesford, but his loss was felt most keenly in the small and close-knit community of Strewd. For weeks following the event, Robert Taylor, assisted by other concerned villagers, searched the extensive woodland around Strewd unsuccessfully for any sign of what could have happened to his son.
So this is a really extensive search. Like they're going to town in
Yeah.
the local area.
Yeah.
And I suppose they would know it's not a stab in the dark where they're looking either, because they've got markers of sightings along the way, and it would have been the same route as he'd walked however many times before.
Hundreds of times before. A man called Mr. Izzard, not Eddie, was walking deep in the woods outside of Aylesford, along a narrow and seldom used path. This was on the 11th of May, 8 weeks after the boy's disappearance.
Oh dear.
And he came across a terrible sight. In a ditch some way off the paths, he discovered the body of a young boy in an advanced state of decomposition. The boy's mitten had been cut from his left hand, and his clothes were damaged and dishevelled, as though he'd been in a struggle or dragged through the forest.
It's a really detailed scene you paint there, Alistair, and really unsavoury in my mind.
No, it's horrendous. It's a sad crime.
These are the things I think about a lot. You were talking about the thin air, thick air, all that kind of stuff. I have on more than one occasion thought, imagine walking up like Backy's where we used to go when we were younger. Imagine walking up there. It's a proper nice forest path at the back of Dunblane, and stumbling across a body. You'd fucking lose your mind. That's PTSD territory right there.
Absolutely.
They're the sort of things I think about.
That's probably more normal.
Yeah, I'd like to know, of all the people listening, which one's more normal? Ali's thin air, thick air, or me worrying about a body?
Now, speaking of the body, the poor condition the body was in made the cause of death impossible to determine at the scene. However, from the amount of blood covering the boy's clothes, it was obvious that he had met a violent end. The body was found roughly 2 miles outside of Rochester, lying in a ditch. It was on its back, with the right arm across the chest, and the left, which had the mitten cut from it, stretched out. Not far from the body, a rusted knife was found with a white horn handle. Not the knife that he'd left with.
That's what I was going to say. It wasn't his knife.
It wasn't his knife.
We're essentially 2 miles from the sighting of him with John and James.
Yeah, about that.
So just so that I'm getting this right, he's 2 miles on the return journey, essentially. So like, he's done the 9 miles to town. He's collected his shit. He's turned around. He's come out. He's been spotted with these two boys, and then he's 2 miles back down the road.
Exactly.
Right, cool.
Robert Taylor himself attended the scene and identified the body as that of his son Richard from the clothing and from a birthmark in the shape of a bunch of currants.
It's just some spotty bits.
Yeah. The body was taken to Rochester Poorhouse, where it was examined by Dr. Edward Seaton and Dr. Bryant. They quickly concluded that the cause of death had been a slash across the throat from the left side to the right side with a short blade of some sort. From the nature of the wound, it was evident that it could not have been inflicted by the deceased boy either deliberately or accidentally.
I would guess by angle and depth and all sorts. It wouldn't take too much to define that.
The coroner's inquest brought back a verdict of willful murder by a person or persons unknown at that time. The list of suspects was small, and before long, because of inconsistencies in their stories, John Bird Bell and his brother James Bell were taken in for further questioning by the magistrates.
What age were John and James?
John Bird Bell was 14 years old, and his brother was 11.
Oh, fuck. I really thought you were going to say, like, 15 and 17, or, like, 16, 18. I was definitely going older with both of them, but yeah.
I know, 14 and 11.
So, essentially same age and younger brother.
Yeah. They both lived with their father in a poor house in Rochester, not far from the place where Richard's body had actually been found. Well, about 2 miles away from where the body was found. The white bone handle knife found at the scene was identified as one belonging to John Bell. And Richard's sister had also recognised the boys from a previous occasion, when they had tried to convince Richard to go into the forest with them when she'd been with him, and he'd refused.
Okay, so they knew each other.
Yes. They were known to each other.
Not even quite acquainted, but they knew of each other's...
I wouldn't have said acquaintances or friends, but they knew each other.
Knowledgeable of each other's existence.
Yeah. Poor Richard was actually the target of some, what we'd call bullying, because he was far better spoken and far better mannered than most of the rural boys, and certainly than any of the boys who would have been staying in a workhouse.
That almost sets him apart, really, from them. Like,
it does. It did.
They'd have seen him as the posh boy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
During the course of the investigation, Richard's body had been buried in a local cemetery. However, as the circumstantial evidence against the two boys began to accumulate, it was decided to exhume the body for further examination. And unusually, John and James Bell were brought to the graveyard to watch Richard's body being dug up. John maintained a cool, quiet calm during the operation, but his younger brother James was visibly shaken and disturbed by the exhumation. When the body was removed from the ground, James approached it and immediately put his hand into the pocket of the jacket that Richard had been buried in and took out the knife that Robert had given his son that fateful day and which had been buried with the boy.
So any robbery that's happened been solely for the money.
Yeah,
like
100%.
For him to still have that would have been worth taking to somebody, but it's been literally we're robbing the rich boy.
Yeah. Unable to bear the fear and the guilt that he'd been living with for over 3 months now, the now 11-year-old James Bell broke down and confessed much of the chilling story of how Richard had met his end. John Bell, along with James, had been planning the callous killing of poor Richard Taylor for some time. They both resented Richard's apparently easy life and, from their view, snooty and posh character. We know that this is about a million miles from reality, since the Taylor family were receiving a parish allowance, meaning that they were living in what we would now call extreme poverty. However, Richard's above average intelligence and the fact that he was so well spoken and polite made him seem of a higher class than he was and made him a target. Also, everything is relative.
They targeted the outsider, the weird guy.
Exactly. They targeted the rich boy, they targeted the outsider.
The weird thing is, like, I genuinely was surprised there when you said he'd been planning it for ages. I assumed this was a momentary robin, is where I was going in my mind.
This was premeditated.
Cold calculated.
It's cold and it is calculated, yeah. It's clear that John Bell was more offended by Richard's manners than James, but the younger brother still helped to plot and execute Richard's murder, although probably with little actual understanding of what the act really meant or the consequences of the deed.
He was just going along.
He was only 11.
Yeah, he was just going along with his big brother, really, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Which is really horrible, because 11's like such a young age as well. He'd just gone,
It is.
yeah, cool, I'll do it, yeah.
No. To give you an idea of the level of premeditation, for many weeks, the two boys had watched Richard when he reached Aylesford to collect the 9 shillings parish allowance, and each time they saw him put the money in his drawstring bag and then conceal the bag in his mitten.
For how
they'd cased him.
Yeah, I was going to say, they've cased him. So over how long a period are we talking about?
James, the younger boy, James, said many weeks, but it was 3 weeks before that the two boys had tried to coax Richard into the forest when he was with his sister, and he'd refused because his sister was with him.
So we can safely assume a couple of months, probably.
Yeah, probably a couple of months, 6 weeks at least. A few weeks before the 4th of March, John and James Bell had, as I said, tried to entice Richard into the woods. But then he had refused because his sister was with him. Richard had no inkling of what the other two boys planned. So on the day in question, when his sister had stayed home, and John Bell told him that there was something he wanted to show him in the woods, Richard went with the boys, unaware of the danger that he was walking into. Once they were sufficiently far away from the main paths, John Bell attacked Richard, while his brother James kept watch nearby. Although only 1 year older, James was significantly bigger than little Richard Taylor, and he had no difficulty in subduing the younger boy and slitting his throat with the white-handled bone knife.
Oh, dude.
Once the deed was done...
Not cool.
I know.
Yeah. All right.
I know, it's grim. And it gets grimmer. Once the deed was done, John Bell then cut the mitten from Richard's left hand and took the money that he knew was concealed inside. He gave 1 shilling and 6pence of it to his brother James, thinking that adding to his brother's complicity would reduce the risk of James telling anyone what the pair had done in the woods that day.
It's yeah. I'm sorry. I was going to start talking there, but I'm just processing in my head. Really, that's what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
There's some menace in this 14-year-old boy, and
Yep.
I feel like it's not just about the money. It's like there's some real deep.
He resented
Yeah.
Richard for being posh, for having what he saw as an easy life. I mean, we know he didn't have an easy life, but everything is relative. He had an easy life compared to the Bell brothers, who lived in a workhouse.
I'm going to say comparative to them. Yeah, we've said he's the rich boy, but he's still, as you say, collecting a parish allowance. So he's by no means at all rich. But
no,
it's all to do with how you see it, isn't it? Like, these boys are never going to come across somebody who's actually rich, other than maybe the boss at the workhouse. So
Yeah.
in their heads, this boy that can saunter about and say please and thank you is upper class, at least middle class anyway.
Certainly middle class.
But to actually have that amount of hatred for somebody because of their perceived class standing is just mad.
I know.
I mean, don't get me wrong.
The younger,
I don't like rich people either, but I don't hate them.
I love rich people. They're bonkers.
Yes, there is that. There is an eccentricity that comes with not having to give a fuck about anything.
Yeah. Now, the younger James Bell was released on the grounds that he had played no physical part in the murder of Richard Taylor, and also because he was an 11-year-old boy and had very little conceptual idea of what his brother was really planning to do.
Yeah, because he's not at that brain space where he's processing what they're talking about yet. He's just going along with his big brother, isn't he?
Yeah. John Bird Bell was arrested and charged with the willful murder of Richard Taylor. The authorities at the time believed that the motive was simple robbery. However, as we shall soon see from the confessions of John Bell, his malice and his jealousy toward Richard was also partly to blame. This wasn't a simple mugging. As you said, there was real resentment for Richard.
And it sounds like it's gotten beyond the point of, like, this isn't fixable, I hate you.
Yeah. John was remanded for trial in Maidstone, and on the way there, he took the authorities to where he had washed his hands and clothes in a pond, not far from the scene, following the murder. He also pointed out the route into the woods that the boys had taken that day, and said to the escorting constable, "That's where I killed the poor boy." Although apparently unremorseful for the murder, John Bell was aware of the severity of the crime that he committed and of the potential punishment that he might receive. On the same journey to Maidstone Prison to await trial, John also remarked to the same constable, "He's better off than I am now. Don't you think he is, sir?" To which the constable agreed that he probably was.
What? So he's just, here's everything. I'm like,
Yeah.
he's ratting on himself.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to follow the narrative here from him being, his younger brother admitted to everything. Is that right?
Yeah. His younger brother admitted to everything, and as soon as his younger brother admitted to everything, so did he.
He started just like, what was it, squawking like a parrot or whatever. He just kept.
Yeah.
Once he was out, he was out.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fine. I was confused in my head there where they were still talking about his younger brother was telling them that this happened, this happened, this happened. But actually,
No,
him as the
this was
perpetrator,
John.
John went, no,
Yep.
I did this.
Yep.
Okay.
I did this. That's where I washed my hands after I did it. The trial of John Bell for the willful murder of Richard Taylor took place on the 29th of July, 1831, at Maidstone Assizes, with Justice Gasserly presiding.
That's a good name we've not come across before.
Judge Justice Gasserly.
Yeah, I'd have remembered that one. I don't think we've come across him before.
No, we haven't. When the charge was read out, in a slight reversal, John Bell pled not guilty.
But he's already told them that he did it.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to sound stupid here, but like, why?
He was probably aiming for manslaughter.
He's probably been told to do that.
Yeah, he will have received some legal advice,
Counsel, as such. But I'm sure you're about to get onto this. But do they go down our standard insanity plea, all that kind of stuff, in his defence?
They tried to, yes. but it doesn't work.
It's like a bog standard for pretty much everything we talk about.
It is. Now, at the trial, evidence was heard from a devastated Robert Taylor and from Richard's 7-year-old sister. Mr. Lewington, the sailor from HMS Warrior, told his part, as did Mr. Cuthbert, the parish relief officer. Also, a line draper from Rochester, Mr. Railton, testified that he had given John Bell change for £0.50 shortly after Richard Taylor had gone missing. This was a huge sum of money for any boy at the time, but even more unusual for a boy who lived in one of Rochester's poorhouses.
Yep.
The most damning evidence, though, was the reading of his brother James's confession and the testimony of Constable Patterson, who was the officer that John himself had confessed to while being escorted to Maidstone jail.
I was going to say, like, the most obvious evidence to present in this case is the fact that he told the police officer he did it.
Yeah.
Surely that's it at that point.
Pretty much, yeah. We're not at the point now where you have to sort of sign your witness statement to the police. If you say it to a policeman, it can be entered as evidence.
Yeah, but it's a he said, she said moment. If there's no...
Slightly, yeah, but John Bell had given Constable Patterson a full account of the crime while on his journey, and it paints an even darker picture of the murder than we already have. I mentioned earlier that this crime was motivated by jealousy and malice, and not just robbery, and this is why. John Bell told Constable Patterson, and the officer then told the court, how John had enticed Richard Taylor off the main paths by claiming that there was something amazing in the forest that he wanted to show him. After leading the younger boy through numerous twists and turns, and once they were far enough into the woods, Richard had become distressed and upset that he no longer knew where he was in the wood or how to find his way back to the main paths. John said that he had no idea how to get back either, and this upset Richard further. Sitting down on the ground, Richard began to cry. This display of what he saw as cowardly behaviour angered John Bell, and it was now that he drew his knife and started toward Richard with murder in his eyes. Richard saw the attack coming, and assuming that what John was after was the 9 shillings he had hidden in his mitten, offered the money to the older boy, along with the small carving knife that his father had given him, and anything else he had on him, if John would just let him go unharmed. John Bell was unmoved, though, and proceeded to attack Richard, stabbing him in the throat before slashing his jugular open and leaving him to bleed to death on the ground while he robbed him.
I mean, I said earlier the picture you painted was quite disturbing, but you've one-upped yourself there.
It's hideous. This is way more than just robbery.
Oh no,
He could have had the money. He could have had the knife. He could have had everything.
It's as we were saying before, there's malice with like rage intent there.
Yeah. After the final evidence had been heard, the judge, Justice Gasserly, explained to the jury that deciding the fate of a 14-year-old boy, John Bird Bell, would require their full attention and should be given the utmost consideration. However, having just heard Constable Patterson's testimony of the boy's own confession, the jury deliberated for exactly 0 minutes. In fact...
Wait. Is this the shortest case ever?
This is the shortest jury deliberation ever.
Perfect.
0 minutes.
They're not even getting a cup of tea. They're not getting a cup of tea and a rich biscuit then.
They didn't even feel the need to leave the bench. The foreman simply stood up and delivered a verdict of guilty. Although they did, however, suggest that John Bell might deserve mercy due to the conditions of his upbringing. That is to say, being raised in relative destitution in a poorhouse. Justice Gasserly, though, knew that the statutory sentence for murder at the time, accepting pleas of insanity, was death. So he donned his black cap and sentenced the 14-year-old boy to hang by the neck until dead. After which, as was often the case, his body would be given over for dissection.
So 1830s, 1840s we're talking about?
Yeah, 1830s.
I can't think of... I mean, that's a very young execution order.
Very young. There
I-
are
Other younger.
there are
that's-
younger,
I was going to
but
say...
it's you're talking 1700s to go younger.
Yeah, that's what I meant. But like in this time period, sentencing a
It's
14... Like that
It's
doesn't...
almost unheard of.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
John Bird Bell had maintained an attitude of aloof and almost childish disdain during the trial, frequently interrupting proceedings with outbursts during witnesses' testimonies, and apparently not really appreciating either the severity of the crime or the potential sentence. The only real emotion the boy showed was said to be a single tear which he shed when he learned that his body would be dissected.
So he doesn't want to give back at all. He's a proper arse.
Well, it also means that he won't be buried in consecrated ground. His body will be given over for dissection and unceremoniously buried in unconsecrated ground.
To a 14-year-old, would that have been important? I mean, I guess he was reasonably mature with his, murder plans and stuff like that. But like, would the parish have been that important to it?
The parish might not, but I think an idea of the everlasting, the afterlife, was far more ingrained in everyone back then. Certainly growing up in a workhouse, religion would have been a huge part of the boy's daily life.
I suppose they probably did prayers and things like that in the mornings at breakfast and everything. I don't know.
Every day.
Yeah. But to have that process of thought to go, they're going to kill me, fine, but like at least bury me where I want to be buried.
Yeah.
That's a mad statement for anyone, never mind a 14-year-old.
It is. But his childish bravado would last until he was returned to his cell in Maidstone jail, where he broke down and wept. When his parents visited him before his execution, he blamed them for his fate. John's father was actually implicated in the concealment of the crime, but there was insufficient evidence to charge him as an accessory after the fact. John himself requested that his brother James attend his execution as an example and a lesson to the young boy.
Okay, I mean, this is getting really deep and troubling, but okay.
John Bird Bell was hanged on August the 1st near Maidstone in front of a crowd of over 8,000 people, which did include his brother James. It was reported that he walked steadily up to the gallows, and his last words were, "Lord, have mercy upon us. Pray, good Lord, have mercy upon us. All the people before me take warning by me. Lord, have mercy upon my poor soul." At 11:30 a.m., John Bird Bell's neck was placed in the noose. He was the youngest person executed in the UK in the 19th century, and he was hanged by the new drop method of a trapdoor. But this shouldn't be mistaken with the long drop, which actually wouldn't come into use for some years. The first person to be hanged by the long drop, I think, was William Horry in 1870-something.
I did know it was 1870s, but I couldn't have told you who it was.
1872, I think, William Horry. Following John Bird Bell's execution, his body was given over to surgeons in Rochester for dissection. And so ended the sad story of the crime of John Bird Bell. I'm not quite finished, though. Due to his very young age, John Bird's crime was sensational public news. And I've actually found a lot of poems and songs written about him at the time in the press, including one that was reportedly written by John Bell himself while in his cell and awaiting execution. So I'd like to read that one before we wrap up.
Please do. But before that, was the brother found guilty of anything at all?
Nope.
So he obviously watched his brother's execution, but wasn't found guilty of anything.
Yeah, he wasn't found guilty of anything. All James Bell had actually done was wait by a hedge about 200 yards away, watching for people on the path.
So because he wasn't an accessory in any way because he hadn't physically done anything.
Yeah. I mean, he was an accessory. If that was two grown men, he would have been charged as an accessory. It was just because he was an 11-year-old boy.
Yeah, given his age, he was given more leeway.
Yeah, 100%. Now, before I read this poem out, I should point out that in my opinion, although it was reported in the press, it's very unlikely that John Bird Bell actually did write this. For me, the language is all wrong for a 14-year-old boy raised in a workhouse in the early 19th century. But I think it still serves as a look at how the crime was viewed at the time by both the media and by the general public.
Because we've already said that he was jealous of Richard's eloquence and things like that. So does that lean into this? Like, you wouldn't have thought that this was written by him?
I wouldn't have thought that a 14-year-old boy raised in a workhouse would have written this. It seems unlikely. But here we go. Come, children and parents too, and listen to these lines, which I have penned within my cell, where I suffer for my crimes. And from my fate a warning take, and keep from evil ways, or if in evil paths you tread, it will cut short your days. Of crimes I have guilty been, though my years they are but few, and now I am condemned to die for a murder, it is true. I knew Taylor had to pass all through a lonely spot, and from the parish for his father 9 shillings he had got, of which I thought to rob him, and troth I now unfold, that he did make resistance with courage stout and bold. I took with me my brother to do this dreadful fact, and stationed him close to the hedge, with directions how to act. To see no one was coming, with me to interfere, while I did murder Taylor, for which runs many a tear. As he sat down, I stabbed him in the neck on the left side, then washed my hands all in a pond that stood by the roadside. I made my brother swear he the secret ne'er would tell, but God above he seed the act, and of it knew full well. When 9 weeks were gone, I thought this deed none ever would know, as none had then the body found, yet I was still in woe. But God, who ne'er lets murder pass without a punishment, caused Izard to discover it as through the woods he went. For which I was brought to trial and sentenced, as you see, to die on Monday morning upon the fatal tree. Now all ye youths, both high and low, by me a warning take, and if you know you're doing ill, your bad ways pray forsake. Or else, like me, too late you'll find distress and woe severe will overtake you in your wickedness and stop your sad career.
So first thing I'm going to interject with is he didn't write that at all.
No, that was written, I think, by a reporter who said that John Bird Bell wrote it to sell papers.
100%. And somebody who is skilled at writing wrote that. Very well read, very well written. I don't see the 14-year-old boy on death row. Death row is a fucking silly word. I didn't mean that, but you know what I mean. He didn't write that.
I know exactly what you mean. And especially being workhouse educated, at the risk of sounding terribly middle class.
That's fair because, like, we've already acknowledged that he was, perceived lower class than Richard, but probably not that much in reality. But he already...
No, but Richard was well spoken.
That's
John
what I mean.
Bird Bell was not.
That's what I mean. But John Bird Bell had already perceived himself as lower class, so there's no way he would have had that in him.
No, I doubt it.
What's a lovely poem?
Yeah. But a terrible story.
I take that back. Not a lovely poem. A well-written, horrible poem is what I meant.
Yeah.
Really. But you knew what I mean.
I knew exactly what you meant. And a horrible story. Youngest person ever executed in the 19th century.
Well, there you go.
Well, in the UK.
In the UK. Hanged by a court of law in the United Kingdom.
Exactly.
Very not you, that case.
I know.
Why that one? I mean, okay, we'll get onto that in a second. Horrific, I think, is probably the easiest way to put that. Like, imagine and like I said it earlier. Could you imagine the guilt in the father's head and mind, and for the rest of his life, sending his son out to go and do the weekly task as such?
Yeah,
and him never coming home again. I just can't comprehend the pain that it creates. So a shout out for that. But the callousness of the crime's totally like, I don't get it. I know we'll never. It's just that level of hatred that comes from someone different. It's a weird thing, isn't it? Like, I know we don't suffer from it, obviously, but it's almost like, it's not xenophobia, but it's along those lines, really, isn't it?
Yeah. As to why this case, it interested me for a number of reasons. I've been looking into quite a lot of child criminals.
Okay.
Recently. We've just started releasing the Teacup Poisoner trilogy in 4 parts. And I've become quite interested in what drives children especially to commit crimes. And the idea that you're born evil, I don't really ascribe to. So child criminals interest me.
We've said before we'll never do the nature-nurture debate on a podcast. There's no point in us doing that. Neither of us are experts. We have our own opinions. I'm absolutely with you. I don't think anybody's born evil. I think that's it's a lazy, sloppy thing to say about somebody. But yeah, I totally get the intrigue that you get from that. But I do find it weird that, like, and we can probably trace this over episodes, that you get into a wee moment of, like, doing poisoners, doing pub crimes, child criminals. It's weird that you get into that, and I'm not surprised that, having done one recently, that you went, oh, I found other knowledge by doing that, and found it that way. Yeah, I hadn't actually related it to the Teacup Poisoner there at all, but it makes sense that you've gone child criminals. That's a weird sentence in itself, but you know what I mean.
No, it's absolutely true. And in this case, I didn't mention it much because it's not pertinent to the story. But John Bird Bell did lead a really rough childhood. He was physically abused by his father, as well as growing up in a workhouse, which is an adverse childhood experience in itself. So I still don't believe anyone's born evil, but you can certainly become evil by the age of 13, 14.
You can bake it right in there at an early age, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Societal issues more than anything else. Like, not one that, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but normally when we talk about people that, not normally, but a lot of the times we talk about people who have suffered from brain injury and all that kind of stuff, but he was just your normal boy.
Yes. We do have to remember that adverse childhood experiences don't have to just be physical. They can be mental. He didn't sustain any sort of brain injury or notable physical trauma as a child, but he did sustain years of systemic physical abuse from his father and grew up in a workhouse, which is rough in itself. Not that we're excusing what he did in any way, shape, or form.
No, not at all. But we're just almost trying to relate it. Almost like that level of mental abuse is huge there.
Yeah, and you do often see violent criminals have violent childhoods and feel the need to exercise the same sort of power over others that they'd had exercised over them during their trauma as a child.
We talked about it in the Teacup Poisoner episodes. We certainly talk a bit about a god complex in that, and
A lot about God complex in that one.
yeah, do you feel like Bird Bell has a bit of that in him, or is it just pure malice?
I don't think Bird Bell has the same sort of God complex that Graham Young had. I think with Bird Bell, it's more like in order to make him feel less weak and inferior because of the way his dad made him feel weak and inferior, he has to make other people weaker than him. He has to inflict the same sort of trauma on other people that was inflicted on him.
Is it just wee man syndrome?
A little bit, yeah.
He's just why you
But
better
wee
than
man
me.
syndrome, where you pick on people weaker than you.
Yeah, big man syndrome.
Big man syndrome.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, that was a horrific tale, Alistair. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's what we do, isn't it?
It is. I'll make that the last child criminal for a while.
If you would, I'd appreciate that, actually. Thank you very much. We've had a few of them recently, everything from June Andavani right through to this. None of them have been tales of happy rainbows. So
No, they haven't.
I don't think we can tell a tale of happy rainbows unless we can find a criminal rainbow.
No, but I do think you'll enjoy the next rabbit hole I'll be going down, which is going to be the development of forensic science, I think.
Very nice.
I've got Spilsbury's autobiography. I've got a couple of other great books that I'm going through.
And I've enjoyed that tonight. It was interesting. We don't say enjoyed, do we?
No, it wasn't an enjoyable one.
No, it really wasn't, actually. I'm quite sad now. I'm going to go down and see if Alan...
Occasionally there are enjoyable ones.
Yes.
Very occasionally.
Very occasionally. I don't know, like sometimes I always come back to that. My Peter Gibbs case is the one that's the one that rattles around this empty space inside. I actually enjoyed that. I know a man died, but he also went, hold my beer, I'm going to fly a plane. So,
yeah.
Nobody killed, well, we don't know if anybody killed him else. Anyway, that's
yeah,
my
we don't
whole
know.
thing. Sometimes
and after the HMS Dreadnought.
I was going to say, and you've got your own ones where you sometimes go, I really enjoyed learning about that.
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, and I'll get a picture up on the website of Beck next to Sarah's wedding shoes.
And write the story of the pissy shoes.
Yeah.
The Bournemouth shoe pisser.
She was more angry at me than the dog because I thought it was hilarious.
Don't tell her I found it funny then. Anyway,
I won't.
We shall leave you as we always do with a thank you, love you, bye.
And a thank you, love you, bye.
Thank you, love you, bye. I can hear myself. Thank you, bye.